You know that feeling when you walk into a room and instantly sense something's wrong, but everyone else seems fine? When you dream about someone you haven't spoken to in years, then they call the next day. When you look at a stranger and somehow know their story before they tell it? Most people dismiss this as coincidence, overthinking, just your imagination. But what if it's not? What if you're one of the rare few whose mind operates on a frequency most people can't even detect? Carl Jung discovered a psychological type, so uncommon, so misunderstood that even he called it the most difficult to comprehend, both by others and by the person living it. He called them introverted intuitives. And if you've ever felt like you're sensing a reality no one else can see, if you've ever been told you're too sensitive or living in your head, if you've ever had insights that proved terrifyingly accurate but couldn't explain how you knew, then you might be carrying one of the rarest and most dangerous gifts of the human psyche. Because Jung left a chilling warning, this gift can either transform you into a visionary or destroy you completely. In this video, we'll explore what makes your mind different, why the world misunderstands you, and most importantly, how to harness this power without being consumed by it. Because the line between insight and insanity is thinner than you think, and you've been walking it your entire life. Let's begin. To understand the introverted intuitive, you must forget everything you know about normal perception. This is not someone who learns by watching, or by listening, or by collecting evidence. They don't need proof to feel what is coming. Their minds are not mirrors of the outside world. They are compasses pointed inward, and what they detect isn't material, but meaning. Carl Jung described this type as someone who perceives the latent, the unborn, the not yet real. They move through life guided not by reason or emotion, but by inner symbols, images, patterns, things even they cannot fully explain. They're like radio towers tuned into the unconscious, both their own and the collective. What to others seems random or ordinary, to them carries an emotional echo, a symbolic undertone. They can often predict events, not with certainty, but with eerie accuracy. They feel energies in rooms, anticipate changes in others' moods, and dream of things before they occur. But these visions don't come with a manual. They arrive without context, without instruction, raw, symbolic, and powerful. And without understanding, they can overwhelm. For the intuitive introvert, reality is not defined by what is seen or said. It is felt beneath the surface. They may walk into a conversation and sense what no one's saying. They may read a book and see metaphors where others see facts. They may wake from a dream feeling as though they've glimpsed a truth far too big for words. To live this way is both a blessing and a burden, because while they are tuned into things others ignore, they are also constantly misunderstood. And the more deeply they sensed, the more alone they begin to feel. We live in a world that demands proof. It rewards clarity, logic, and measurable outcomes. We are taught to explain ourselves, to justify our feelings with evidence, to back our instincts with data. But what happens to those who sense meaning before it appears? Who know without knowing how? Who feel truth but can't explain it? The intuitive introvert walks through a culture built on certainty, carrying only impressions. And that difference between what they feel and what the world accepts can become unbearable. They may speak up in a meeting, warning that something feels off, only to be waved off as vague or irrational. They may sense the emotional collapse of a loved one long before the person even realizes it themselves. And still, when they try to express it, they are asked, "Where's your proof?" They say, "I don't trust that person," and others ask, "Why?" But they can't answer, they just know. And in a world obsessed with reasons, that's not enough. So they learn to stay quiet, to hide what they sense, to keep the dreams and warnings and inner pictures locked away, untouched. They withdraw not because they want to, but because explaining becomes exhausting. They anticipate the skepticism before it even arrives. Eventually, they stop trying, and the silence is misunderstood too. People may see them as cold, aloof, distracted. Some may label them antisocial or emotionally distant. In reality, they are simply somewhere else, mentally navigating an inner terrain few could understand. Their gaze is inward. Their focus is symbolic. And that makes them appear unreachable. Even friends and family may struggle to reach them, not because they lack love, but because they operate on a different frequency, a frequency that's hard to tune into without intuition of your own. They may long for connection, but find it nearly impossible to explain the world they live in. The landscape of impressions, the unspoken messages, the vivid dreams that feel more real than daylight. But perhaps the greatest misunderstanding is this: the world sees their disconnection as a flaw. Jung saw it as a function, a deeply rare one, and that function, he warned, comes with incredible power and tremendous risk. For the introverted intuitive, life is a constant dialogue with the invisible. Every glance, every silence, every coincidence becomes a whisper from something deeper. They don't just live events, they decode them. But this decoding isn't conscious. It rises like mist from the unconscious, images, dreams, inner symbols that defy language. These symbols arrive suddenly, as if from nowhere, carrying a strange emotional weight, urgent, sacred, unformed. The gift lies in this ability to perceive meaning before it crystallizes, to feel the emotional architecture of what others dismiss as chance. They sense the hidden pattern behind a conversation. They feel the trajectory of a relationship long before it reveals itself. They don't analyze life, they intuit it. But this same ability also isolates them. Because how do you share an insight that came in a dream? How do you explain a decision you made based on a sense? Most people demand logic, not layered impressions. In a world that values linear clarity, the intuitive introvert speaks in metaphor, and often they are misunderstood, viewed as impractical, indecisive, or disconnected. The truth is, they are navigating a symbolic landscape with no map. What others see as randomness, they experience as emotional resonance. What others call coincidence, they feel as synchronicity. And so the introverted intuitive is often caught between two worlds, the symbolic one that feeds their inner life, and the literal one that governs outer reality. They belong to neither fully. In one, they are too abstract. In the other, too grounded. Jung saw this tension clearly. He believed these inner visions could be powerful agents of transformation if they were brought into consciousness. Symbols, he said, are not just messages from the psyche, they are invitations to create, to embody, to give birth to something meaningful in the world. But left unprocessed, these symbols pile up like static. What begins as insight turns into inner noise. What could have been clarity becomes confusion. Like a radio catching multiple frequencies at once, the mind begins to distort rather than translate. That's the burden. Without a vessel to carry them, without language, art, action, these visions can overflow the psyche and the very mind. Built to sense what's emerging begins to drown in what it cannot yet define. The gift becomes a flood, and the person, instead of becoming a channel for truth, becomes consumed by fragments of it. Carl Jung admired the power of intuition, but he feared what happened when it was left unchecked. He warned that if the introverted intuitive did not find a way to express their inner images, those images would eventually express themselves, not through art or insight, but through psychic disturbance. What begins as subtle vision can grow into overwhelming obsession. And in the absence of structure, the unconscious doesn't whisper, it invades. Jung called this process inflatio, a psychic condition where the ego becomes swollen with unconscious material. The boundaries between self and archetype dissolve. The individual begins to identify not with their grounded personality, but with the vast mythic forces stirring inside them. And here's the danger. It doesn't feel like delusion. It feels like truth. They believe they've discovered a hidden mission, a divine purpose, a sacred calling. The world becomes a grand stage, and they, the misunderstood prophet, at its center. But this isn't enlightenment. It's possession. There is no humility in this state, only certainty. Questions vanish, doubt is condemned. Anyone who challenges the vision is labeled blind, primitive, asleep. And slowly, the intuitive becomes untouchable, not because they're transcending the world, but because they're losing their grip on it. The signs are subtle at first, an exaggerated sense of destiny, a feeling of being chosen, a growing alienation from ordinary people, but over time, the visions tighten their grip. The intuitive becomes consumed by their own symbolism, mistaking personal insight for universal law. And this isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it shows up as quiet grandiosity, a smug detachment, a belief that they're simply beyond others' comprehension, but inside, they're adrift. Confusing archetype with identity, inspiration with ego. Jung once described a patient who dreamed of a dark creature rising from her depths, a black serpent that eventually emerged from her mouth, transforming into a golden one. To some, this sounds like madness, but to Jung, it was a map of inner transformation, the descent into shadow, the confrontation with the unconscious, and the rebirth that follows. The golden head was not a sign of insanity, it was a symbol of healing, but only because it found form. It was expressed, not just experienced, and that is the key. Vision alone is not enough. What saves the intuitive introvert is not the gift, it's the integration. Without it, they don't become wise, they become lost. The mind, no matter how gifted, cannot carry the unconscious alone. It must translate what it sees into something human, something real, something shared. Otherwise, what began as intuition will end in inflation, and what once offered guidance will become a trap. Silence, for the introverted intuitive, begins as self-protection. After so many moments of being misunderstood, so many blank stares, dismissive laughs, or polite nods, they learn to hold back. Not out of fear, but out of exhaustion. Why speak a language no one seems to hear? Why share a dream that only invites skepticism? And so they retreat, not just from others, but into themselves. Their inner world, once vibrant and dynamic, becomes a sanctuary, and over time, a fortress. What was once a well of creativity turns into a sealed chamber where meaning echoes back on itself. The symbols keep coming, but they are no longer shared, shaped, or grounded. They begin to spiral. The dreams intensify, the visions blur together, and the intuitive, now cut off from feedback and friction, becomes swallowed by their own psychic ecosystem. It's not that the insights stop, they accelerate, but without context, without resistance, they lose all proportion. Even ordinary interactions begin to feel symbolically loaded. A stranger's glance becomes a message. A song on the radio feels like prophecy. The mind becomes hypersensitive, hyper-meaningful, hyper-fragile, and here is where the real danger emerges. In isolation, the intuitive no longer distinguishes insight from illusion. Everything starts to feel significant, prophetic, urgent. But without dialogue, without the tether of external feedback, there's no way to test or temper those feelings. The visions become louder, the patterns become obsessive. Reality bends. What was once profound becomes unbearable. And yet, they may still believe they are evolving, awakening, becoming more attuned. In truth, they are unraveling in private. And the saddest part is, this process is often invisible. They may still go to work, smile in public, function, but behind the surface, they're drowning in unprocessed symbolism. not because they are weak or unstable, but because they are deeply alone in a world that doesn't speak their language. Jung warned that when the inner voice becomes the only voice, the self splits. The person no longer lives in the world. They live in a world of symbols that no longer point outward, but loop back inward, like a hall of mirrors. And eventually, the silence isn't just social, it becomes existential. There is a way through. Jung didn't just diagnose the risks of introverted intuition, he offered a path toward its transformation. The answer wasn't suppression or conformity, it was expression, not in the form of explanation, which often fails this type, but in symbols of their own choosing, through art, writing, movement, reflection, or ritual. Anything that brings the internal vision into the world with form and structure. Because a vision, when unspoken, remains vapor. But once shaped, it becomes real. It becomes medicine. When the intuitive introvert externalizes their insights, they create a bridge between inner truth and shared reality. The very act of shaping a vision into words, music, or motion gives it grounding. It becomes real, communicable, part of the human story. And in doing so, the introvert doesn't lose their uniqueness. They clarify it. But more importantly, they protect themselves. Because expression is not just a creative act. For this type, it's survival. It's how they avoid being swallowed by the very unconscious they are so attuned to. It's how they maintain their identity, prevent fragmentation, and stay anchored to something larger than their own thoughts. The more they share, the more they stay connected, not just to others, but to themselves. This doesn't mean every intuitive must become an artist. It means they must find a form, their form, for making the invisible visible. For some, it may be journaling dreams. For others, symbolic thinking in philosophy, theology, or myth. For some, even building something physical that reflects an inner vision, a sculpture, a garden, a system of ideas. Even a quiet conversation that holds truth can be enough. The method doesn't matter. The act does, because the greatest tragedy of the intuitive introvert is not being misunderstood. It's going unheard, even by themselves. To ignore their visions is to betray the very mechanism that makes them whole. And this is why Jung viewed individuation, the integration of the unconscious into the conscious, as the ultimate task. Not just for the intuitive introvert, but for every soul. It is not a rejection of the world, but a deep engagement with it. Not through conformity, but through meaning. Not through noise, but through truth. Grounded intuition becomes insight. Shared insight becomes wisdom. And wisdom, Jung believed, was the true goal of individuation, the path that leads not away from the world, but deeply into it. Does this sound like you? Do you sense things before they happen? Dream in symbols? Struggle to explain a truth you feel, but can't quite describe? If so, you might be one of Jung's rare intuitive introverts. And if you are, you're not alone. And you're not broken, you're attuned to a deeper layer of life, one most people never notice. But this gift needs tending. And expression. That's what we explore here, bridging the inner world with the outer one. So if this resonated, reflect on it, journal it, maybe send it to someone who'd understand. And if you want more like this, subscribe. We don't chase algorithms, we follow meaning. Until next time, stay close to the edges.